The bank called again this morning. $42,187.32. That's what they said, reciting it like I should already know it by heart. Foreclosure proceedings start in 30 days if we don't come up with something. 30 days. Sarah just looked at me. She's been working double shifts at the clinic, picking up anything she can, but it's not enough. Not close. That's why I'm here, smelling like stale coffee and regret before I've even clocked in. This place was the only one that didn't laugh when I admitted my last job was managing household affairs. The diner is big, bigger than it looked from the highway. All chrome and cracked vinyl. Fluorescent lights hummed, a constant low thrum that felt like it was vibrating in my teeth. The booths are wide, worn smooth in places, ripped in others. It smells like burnt grease, something vaguely floral trying to cover it up, maybe pine cleaner, and a lot of dust. There's a long counter with spinning stools, a griddle sizzling even though it's almost midnight, and a wall of windows looking out onto the truck yard. Rain is streaking down them now, blurring the headlights. It's quiet, mostly. The hiss of the coffee machine, the occasional rumble of a passing 18-wheeler. The kitchen looks industrial, stainless steel everything, and surprisingly clean. Someone's been working. Hal, I think his name was, just tossed me a set of keys and a look that said he was deeply, deeply glad to be leaving. He didn't say much. "Here," he mumbled, dropping a folded sheet of paper onto the laminate countertop next to the cash register. "Shift starts now." He didn't meet my eyes. He just hurried out the door, practically tripping over his own feet. I called after him, "Hey, is there anything I should know?" But he was already halfway to his car. I figured it was just a weird guy. People are weird, especially people working overnight in places like this. I unfolded the paper. It was a list, typed on what looked like an old dot matrix printer, yellowed and brittle around the edges. 1. If someone addresses you as if they know you but you do not recognize them, do not confirm or deny how you know them. Treat the interaction as a case of mistaken identity and disengage politely. Okay, that's odd. Like someone had a run-in with a crazy person before. I chuckled, sketching a little cartoon truck driver with a thought bubble on a napkin. Don't worry, buddy. I got this. 2. If you find footprints in dust or debris in an area that should have had no traffic, do not follow them. Note direction and report. Footprints. Seriously? Is this place haunted? Probably just some bored employee trying to mess with the new guy. 3. If a security recording shows you in a location during a time you were not there, report it immediately. Do not try to account for it or explain it to the responding officer. Now I was just getting suspicious. Security recordings? What kind of truck stop needs that? A little excessive, don't you think? Maybe they've had some trouble with theft. 4. When storing or arranging items in the dry storage room, always leave them in odd numbers. Never leave exactly 2 of anything together. That one made me laugh out loud. Odd numbers? What is this? Some kind of superstitious thing. My grandma used to say you shouldn't walk under ladders, but this is a new level of weird. 5. Every visitor receives a badge at entry. At the end of each shift, count the returned badges. The number returned must equal the number issued. If it does not, do not leave. Okay, that's responsible, I guess. Standard procedure still. It all felt a little intense. Like someone was preparing for a very specific kind of disaster. 6. Do not ask the outgoing shift why they look the way they look. Take the keys. Say the departure phrase. Begin your shift. That one sent a little chill down my spine. Hal did look awful, pale, eyes darting around like he expected something to jump out at him. I shook it off. He probably just had a bad day, or a bad life. 7. After 1 a.m., ride the elevator facing away from the doors. Do not turn around until the doors open at your floor. An elevator? I hadn't even noticed an elevator. I glanced around. Sure enough, tucked away in the corner near the restrooms, a small, dark, wood-paneled elevator. Why would I need to face away from the doors? It's just an elevator. 8. If your supervisor gives you a verbal instruction that contradicts the written guidelines, Follow the written guidelines. Do not confront. Simply comply with what is written. That was controlling. But again, maybe just a way to keep things consistent. I folded the paper up and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Probably won't need it. Just some eccentric rules from a previous employee. I started wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The rain outside had picked up, drumming against the windows. The humming of the lights seemed louder now, pressing in on me. I noticed a small chipped ceramic sugar dispenser on the counter. It contained exactly 2 sugar packets. I stared at it for a beat too long, then resolutely looked away. I was restocking the coffee stirrers, small, plastic, individually wrapped items. A surprisingly meditative task, actually, just sliding them into the dispenser, making sure they weren't tangled. The diner was quiet, thankfully. Perhaps 10 people scattered around, mostly truckers nursing mugs and staring out at the rain. It was that kind of night, the kind where the highway disappears under a gray sheet and everyone just wants to be somewhere else. I hadn't seen another employee since Hal left, which was fine with me. I didn't need anyone breathing down my neck, telling me how to fill a sugar dispenser. The chipped ceramic one was still bothering me, though. I kept glancing at it. 2 packets. It felt wrong, like a visual discordance. I knew it was ridiculous. Probably just someone hadn't bothered to refill it properly. Still, I found myself walking over and subtly sliding a 3rd packet in, pushing it down so it wasn't immediately obvious, just to even it out, to make it right. It was a dumb impulse. I'm not usually a neat freak, but the thought of that uneven number sitting there, it was unsettling. That's when the bell above the door chimed. Another customer, a man tall, wearing a dark raincoat and a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't what you'd call imposing, but there was something smooth about his movements, like he was very practiced at being unremarkable. He walked straight towards the counter. "Kendrick," he said, as he approached. It wasn't a question, not even a particularly friendly greeting, just a statement. My name. I paused, halfway through wiping down a spill somebody had left on the counter. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He smiled, a quick, practiced thing. "Good to see you again. We had a good talk last week, didn't we? About the garden?" "The garden? I don't have a garden. I live in a small apartment with a concrete patio. The closest I get to gardening is occasionally killing a succulent." I stared at him, trying to place his face. Had I met him somewhere? Maybe at the grocery store? A hardware store? A flash of anxiety tightened in my chest. I was terrible with faces. "Oh, right," I stammered, immediately regretting it. "The garden? Yeah, it's coming along nicely." The words felt clumsy, forced. He was looking at me expectantly, and I was digging myself into a hole. I could feel my cheeks warming. This was awkward. Just a case of mistaken identity, right? Happens all the time. He continued to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Glad to hear it. I was hoping to get a refill on the coffee. Black, like last time. My hand was already reaching for a mug. I was about to nod, to confirm this fabricated shared history, to smooth over the confusion, to keep things easy. But then a smell hit me. Not a bad smell, exactly. Just wrong, like ozone, but mixed with something sweet and faintly metallic. It made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. And as I reached for the coffee pot, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Luz, one of the truckers, was staring. Not at me, but through me, towards the man. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. I stopped. My hand hovered over the pot. I don't think we've met before," I said, forcing the words out. My voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. "I'm pretty new here." The man's smile vanished. Just gone. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at me. A slow, assessing look that made my stomach clench. Then he nodded, a curt, sharp movement. "Right," he said, his voice suddenly flat. "My mistake." He turned and walked to a booth in the back without ordering. He just sat there, staring out the window. I finished filling the coffee pot, my hands shaking slightly. The smell was fading, but the prickling sensation on my neck remained. I glanced back at Luz. She was looking down at her plate, stirring her coffee with a slow, deliberate motion. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted, like a wrong note in a song. I tucked the crumpled rules from Hal deeper into my pocket. I needed to remember every single word, and I had a feeling I was going to need them. The chipped sugar dispenser suddenly seemed less important, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about the uneven number. I counted the stirrers again. 37. A prime number. It felt significant, but I couldn't articulate why. The chipped formica of booth 6 was sticky even after I wiped it down 3 times. Cherry syrup, probably. Some trucker had spilled it earlier, leaving a faint, cloying sweetness in the air. It was 2:17 a.m., slow, always slow around this time. I was trying to occupy myself by rearranging the sugar packets, even though they were already perfectly aligned. Just something to do. Something to keep my hands from fiddling with the edges of the napkins, from starting another doodle of a goofy-looking bear wearing a chef's hat. It was a nervous habit, and I didn't need to add to the weirdness of the night. I'd finished with the booths and was working my way around the perimeter, wiping down the baseboards. It wasn't strictly part of my duties, but Gwen, the day shift waitress, was a stickler for cleanliness. And honestly, it gave me something to focus on besides the empty tables and the unsettling quiet. The diner was old, built back in the 50s, and the linoleum floor was starting to buckle in places. Behind the counter, there was a narrow corridor leading to the storage room and the employee bathroom. It was always dusty back there because the door didn't seal properly. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the dust that had accumulated along the linoleum of the corridor. Clear, defined prints, like someone had walked through there recently. But that was impossible. Hal hadn't mentioned anyone going back there during his closing routine, and I hadn't seen or heard anyone. They weren't deep, not like someone carrying a heavy load, but definite, and they led straight to the end of the corridor, to the bathroom door. My first thought was Sergio, the dishwasher. Maybe he'd snuck a smoke back there, even though it was against policy. But Sergio was meticulous. He wouldn't leave footprints like that. He'd wipe his feet, or at least try to. I glanced back at the sugar dispenser. 37 stirrers. Still, it felt connected somehow. Everything felt connected tonight, but in a way that didn't make sense. I told myself I was just tired. It was almost 3 in the morning. My eyes were probably playing tricks on me. It was a diner, not a crime scene. Then it clicked. The rule. Something about footprints. It wasn't a clear memory, more of a feeling of dread associated with the words. Something about not following them, not looking. I didn't remember the exact phrasing, just the weight of it. A coldness that settled in my stomach. I pictured Hal's face when he'd handed me the list, the way his hands trembled slightly. It wasn't just some quirky set of instructions, was it? I grabbed a notepad and a pen from the server station. I didn't look down the corridor. I didn't even glance in that direction. My focus was on documenting. Footprints in dust, corridor near bathrooms, leading to end of hall, no visible traffic. I wrote it down, carefully, methodically. Then I added, direction towards bathroom. It felt ridiculous, like writing a report for a ghost hunt, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be precise. I didn't want to see what was at the end of that hallway. I didn't want to know who or what had made those prints. I didn't want to risk finding out. I just wanted to get through my shift. I wanted to get home to Clara and the kids. I wanted to pretend this night hadn't happened. I finished writing and tucked the notepad into my pocket, next to the crumpled list of rules. The diner felt colder now, the air thick with a silence that wasn't peaceful. I finished wiping down the baseboards, carefully avoiding looking towards the corridor. The scent of cherry syrup seemed stronger, almost sickly sweet. I took a deep breath and started refilling the salt shakers. The salt felt gritty between my fingers. I'd have to remember to check the inventory in the storage room later, assuming I could bring myself to go back there. It was going to be a long night, and I had a feeling, a very strong feeling, that I hadn't heard the last of this. I was polishing the chrome edging on the napkin dispensers. It was a pointless task, really. They were already clean, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, but it kept my hands busy, and the repetitive motion was calming. I guess. It was 3:48 a.m., still no customers, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional crackle from the radio. I'd switched it to a classic country station, hoping it would fill the emptiness a little. Hank Williams was singing about lost love. Appropriate, I thought. The diner smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. Not a pleasant combination, but familiar. I'd been working overnights for almost a week now, and the smell had started to feel normal. I'd even stopped noticing the slight wobble in Booth 3's table leg. Small victories, I supposed. Clara had been asking about getting a new table, but new furniture wasn't exactly in the budget. Not with the foreclosure looming. I tried to focus on the chrome, on the way the light reflected off its surface. Anything to avoid thinking about the bank, about the surgery bills, about everything. Then Luz, the trucker who'd been parked in booth 7 for the last hour, flagged me down. She just pointed at the security monitor above the cash register. It was pointed at the corridor leading to the bathrooms. "Someone walked through there," she said, her voice low. "I saw someone on the monitor a few minutes ago. Thought it was you, but you were here." I glanced at the monitor. It showed the empty corridor, the dusty linoleum. Nothing unusual. "Probably just a shadow," I said, trying to sound reassuring. Luz didn't look convinced. She just shook her head slightly and went back to stirring her coffee. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked, without looking up. "No. I've been here, right here at the counter, refilling sugar, wiping down booths." I gestured around the diner, trying to emphasize my presence. "I haven't left this area in at least 30 minutes. Luz finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Just seemed like you. The way you move." She shrugged and took a sip of her coffee. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. It was the way she said it, the casualness of her observation, like she'd seen something she couldn't quite articulate. I walked over to the security console. Old technology, grainy black and white images. I rewound the footage to 2 a.m. The corridor was empty. 2:15 a.m., still empty. Then at 2:23 a.m., there it was, a figure walking down the corridor. And it was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. Same build, same posture, even the same faded denim jacket. It wasn't a clear image. The quality was awful, but there was no mistaking the way I walked. The slight hitch in my left leg from that old football injury. It was undeniable. I hadn't been anywhere near that corridor at 2:23 a.m. I'd been at home asleep. Clara had been restless, kept waking up. I remembered checking the time on my phone, 2:47 a.m. I'd made her some chamomile tea. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a glitch in the system, a recording error. The monitor was old after all. Or maybe it was a trick of the light, a distorted reflection. But the way the figure moved, it was too accurate, too me. Then the rule surfaced. Fragments of it? Something about recordings, something about not being where you should be, and something about reporting it immediately, no questions, no trying to figure it out. Just report it. It felt like a panic switch, a desperate instruction buried deep in my memory. I dismissed it, initially. A faulty recording, a trick of the eye, but the image on the screen was unshakable. It was me, and I hadn't been there. I found the phone number for the security company taped to the side of the console. My hands were slick with sweat. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed. I told the operator what I'd seen, my voice sounding strangely detached. "There's a discrepancy with the security footage," I said. "Someone matching my description was recorded walking in the corridor at 2:23 a.m. I was not here at that time." The operator asked for details, for my name and employee ID. I gave it to him, feeling a growing sense of dread. He said he'd log the incident and send a technician to investigate. I asked if I should save the footage, and he said no, just let it run. He said they would pull the relevant files remotely. As soon as I hung up, I turned off the monitor. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The grainy image of my doppelganger was burned into my mind. I started cleaning the coffee machine, scrubbing at the spouts with a steel wool pad. I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself. The metallic tang of the cleaner filled the air. I didn't watch the rest of the tape. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't try to explain it. I just reported it. And now, I had a feeling the diner had changed. Not visibly, but fundamentally. The air felt heavier, the silence more profound. I continued cleaning, but my hands weren't shaking. They were numb. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that whatever had walked down that corridor wasn't just a glitch in the system. It was something else entirely, something that had used my face, something that was in some way now connected to me. I finished cleaning the coffee machine and started stacking the clean mugs, taking extra care to align the handles perfectly. It was a small act of control in a situation that felt utterly out of control. I began making a fresh pot of coffee, the familiar smell a small comfort in the growing darkness. The chipped formica of the counter was cool under my forearm. I was restocking the sugar caddies, those little cardboard dispensers. It was almost 4 a.m., the quietest time of the night. Just the hum of the refrigerated display case and the occasional thrum of a truck shifting gears outside. I liked this part of the shift. The small, repetitive tasks. It gave me a chance to, well, not relax exactly, but to just be for a few minutes without having to anticipate what some driver needed. I was trying to focus on the sugar, on fitting the packets neatly into the dispenser, but my mind kept drifting back to the security footage. It wasn't just the image of whoever that was. It was the feeling that something had shifted, that the diner wasn't quite as solid as it used to be. That was stupid. It was a grainy security video, a trick of the light. I'd been stressed, exhausted. It had probably looked like me because I was just primed to see my own face. That's all. The sugar caddies held 20 packets each. I'd already done half the counter. It was mind-numbing, but better than staring at the empty booths and thinking about foreclosure notices. Clara's surgery had been a success, thank God, but the bills, they were a monster all their own. I was careful to align each packet just so within the cardboard slots, making sure they faced the same direction. Paul, my oldest, used to do that with his Lego bricks. He had to have everything just right. I got to the end of the counter and realized I'd done something wrong. I counted 1, 2, 3, 14, 15, 16. 16 sugar caddies, an even number. It felt wrong, immediately, inexplicably wrong. It wasn't like they had to be symmetrical or anything. It was just off. I tried to ignore it. It was just an arbitrary number. I was letting the weirdness from the security room infect my brain. This was a job, just stock the sugar. Then something else surfaced. A whisper from that same place the rules came from. The blurry instruction about arrangements, things, odd numbers, keeping things in odd numbers, never leaving pairs, never even numbers. The words weren't clear, but the feeling behind them was insistent, like a low-grade electric shock. I rubbed my forehead, trying to shake it off. This was ridiculous. I glanced toward the back, toward the storage room. There was a stack of unused sugar caddies there, enough to fix it, but reaching them meant leaving the front counter unattended for a minute, even just 30 seconds. I checked my watch, 4:13 a.m., still quiet. No trucks had pulled up in the last 15 minutes, but Gwen wouldn't be in until 6, and I was supposed to finish restocking before she got here. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. It was a stupid feeling, just a quirk of my tired brain. But the discomfort grew stronger, prickling at the back of my neck, an irrational urge to correct the arrangement, to make it right. I looked at the sugar caddies again, their sterile white boxes mocking my indecision. I knew with a certainty that bypassed logic that leaving them as they were was wrong. The feeling was almost physical, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I walked to the storage room, my steps deliberate, each one feeling weighted. The room was damp and smelled of cardboard and stale coffee. The new sugar caddies were stacked neatly against the back wall. I grabbed one, then walked back to the counter. I took one sugar caddy from the row of 16 and replaced it with the new one, creating a row of 17. The tension eased immediately, like a muscle finally relaxing. It was still absurd, but it felt better. I stared at the 17 caddies for a long moment, feeling a strange mixture of relief and self-disgust, like I'd yielded to some irrational compulsion. Then I remembered the small plate of complimentary cookies I had set out for the truckers earlier. 4 cookies. I'd arranged them neatly in a square. 4. I hadn't even noticed at the time. Now I remembered distinctly wanting to add a 5th cookie but thinking it would be overkill. I glanced at the door, listening for the sound of an engine pulling into the lot. Nothing. But a new thought formed, a cold knot in my stomach. The cookies. If the sugar caddies were important, what about the cookies? I had been planning to check on the coffee levels in the pots to make sure there was enough brewed for the rush that would start around 5, but I couldn't leave the cookies. I couldn't risk leaving an even number of anything. I walked back toward the counter, scanning the lot. Still empty. I grabbed a napkin and began to tear it into tiny pieces, carefully arranging them on the plate alongside the 4 cookies to mimic the shape of a 5th. I wasn't just making do, I was actively altering what was there, creating something new to disrupt the symmetry. It was a pathetic act, a frantic attempt to appease some unseen force, but I couldn't stop. I stayed there, kneeling by the cookie plate, meticulously arranging the shredded napkin, until the first headlights cut through the darkness outside, a long-haul rig, slowing as it approached the pumps. The driver, I assumed, wouldn't notice the strangely decorated plate, but I would. I knew, with a chilling clarity, that I had already entered a different kind of night. The night where even the smallest arrangements felt consequential, and I left the coffee pot to brew itself unmonitored. The chipped formica of the counter was cold under my elbows. I was wiping it down with a damp rag, going over the same section for the 5th time, just to have something to do. 5:32 a.m. Gwen would be here in just under 1 hour. I'd already run the dishwasher twice, restocked the napkin dispensers, and refilled the salt and pepper shakers. It was the quietest part of the night, the lull before the pre-dawn truck drivers started rolling in, desperate for coffee and a greasy breakfast. It was peaceful. I'd gotten into the habit of alphabetizing the sugar packets as I refilled the dispensers. It was stupid, I knew, a complete waste of time. But it was something to focus on, something to impose order on a night that felt increasingly off-kilter. A, B, C, D, E, F. I was halfway through the G's when I remembered the rule about odd numbers. It wasn't a rule I particularly liked, not in the same way as, I don't know, keeping the coffee hot. It just felt necessary, like ignoring it would be inviting trouble, and after everything that had happened, I wasn't in the mood for any more trouble. I finished the sugar packets, then glanced at the visitor badge log. It was part of the closing checklist right at the bottom. Count the badges. Make sure they all came back. I'd always thought it was a pointless exercise. Who steals a truck stop visitor badge? But now it felt different. Like some kind of accounting, a reckoning. There was a stack of unused badges in the drawer, still in their plastic wrapping. I peeled one off, the adhesive leaving a sticky residue on my fingers. Then I started counting the returned badges, laying them out on the counter in neat rows. Brown, plastic, each one bearing a different number. 1, 2, 3, 15, 16, 17. I'd signed in 18 people tonight. I counted again. 17. My stomach clenched. One missing. It had to be a mistake. I shuffled the pile, checking underneath. Nothing. I glanced at the logbook, flipping back through the pages. The last entry was for a Sergio Vargas, a driver hauling produce from Florida. He'd signed in around 10 p.m., looking tired and smelling of diesel. He'd ordered a slice of apple pie and a bottomless cup of coffee, then left around 11:30. I remembered him clearly, a friendly enough guy. I checked the date on the entry, October 14th. 6 months ago. My breath hitched. That wasn't right. The logbook had been started this month. How could an entry from 6 months ago be the last one? This was just a mistake. I must have grabbed the wrong logbook. There was a spare in the office. A newer one. I started to reach for it, then stopped. The feeling, that cold pressure in my chest returned. It wasn't about finding another logbook. It was about the badge. The missing badge. The feeling was too familiar now. That tight, insistent pull. Like something was demanding to be acknowledged. And the rule, or what I remembered of it, something about making sure everything accounted for. Every arrival, every departure. It wasn't just about the count, it was about completion. I ran my hand over the counter, feeling the smooth, cool formica. It did nothing to calm the sudden heat rising in my face. I hadn't been paying attention, I realized. Not really. I'd been too focused on the sugar packets, the coffee, the endless cycle of wiping and restocking. I hadn't been watching the door. I hadn't been seeing who came and went. I grabbed the logbook again, staring at the entry for Sergio Vargas, 6 months ago. A phantom entry. A ghost in the system. I replayed the events of the night in my mind, trying to remember every face, every interaction, but my memory was fuzzy, fragmented. It was a long night, and I was always tired. I walked to the security camera monitor, fast-forwarding through the footage from 10 p.m. There he was, Sergio Vargas, signing the logbook. He looked exactly as I remembered. Then I fast-forwarded to 11:30, watching him leave the diner. He walked to his rig, climbed into the cab, and drove off. Everything seemed normal. But then I rewound the footage, slowing it down, frame by frame. As Sergio reached for the logbook, his hand passed over something on the counter. Something small and rectangular. He brushed it aside, almost accidentally, before signing his name. I paused the footage, zooming in. It was a badge, a visitor badge. He'd put it back in the drawer before signing in. He hadn't returned it. I stared at the screen, my mouth gone dry. The rational part of my brain, the part that still clung to the hope of a simple explanation, was crumbling. Maybe he'd thought it was a tip jar. Maybe he'd mistaken it for something else. Maybe. But the feeling in my chest wouldn't let me believe it. The rule, the missing badge, the phantom entry, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. It was something else. Something I didn't understand and didn't want to. I checked the time. 5:48 a.m. Gwen would be here in 12 minutes. I knew I should call the police, report the missing badge, but I didn't. Something told me it wouldn't matter. That a police report wouldn't change anything, that it might even make things worse. I walked back to the counter, picked up the 17 returned badges, and carefully placed them back in the drawer. Then I sat down, staring at the empty space where the 18th badge should have been. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until I figured out what Sergio Vargas was still doing here. And not until I figured out why his name was in a logbook from 6 months ago. I was wiping down the sticky plastic of booth 6, going over the same spot 3 times, mostly just to avoid thinking about the badge. The chipped formica felt cool under the cloth, and the lemon scent of the cleaner was enough to drown out the stale coffee smell that seemed permanently embedded in everything. It was 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes until Una started her shift. 2 minutes until I could just hand things over. The overnight was always the hardest, not because of any actual work, but because of the quiet. The trucks were mostly gone by 5, leaving just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle of the radio. It was the kind of quiet that made your own thoughts too loud. I doodled a little cartoon truck on a napkin, the wheels slightly lopsided. Old habit, something to do with my hands. I finished the booth and started stacking the sugar caddies. 18. I paused, glancing at the little wire rack. 18. It had to be an odd number. It always had to be. I grabbed one from the back, adding it to the pile. 19 better. I didn't even consciously think about it anymore. It was just a reflex, like flinching. The bell above the door chimed. Una. She was already halfway to the counter. Her shoulders hunched, her face pale. She looked wrong. Not sick exactly, just off. Like she'd been crying but hadn't quite finished. Her usually bright red lipstick was smudged, and her eyes were ringed with dark circles. I'd known Una for almost a year, worked alongside her during a few weekend fill-ins before taking this overnight gig. She always had a joke ready, a smile on her face. This wasn't Una. I automatically reached for the cash drawer, starting the end of shift count. $53.72. I glanced up at Una, and the question was already forming on my lips. What happened? I opened my mouth, ready to ask, and that's when I smelled it. Not coffee, not lemon cleaner. Something else. Something metallic, faintly sweet, and old. Like dust and iron, it made the back of my throat tighten. And then, just as the question was about to escape, I noticed the way Una's hand trembled as she reached for the keys. Not a small tremor, but a deep, shaking spasm that made the metal jingle in her grip. My hand froze midair. I knew somehow that asking would be bad. That whatever was happening with Una, whatever had made her look like this, wasn't something I wanted to know. The metallic smell intensified, filling my nostrils. The rational part of me, the part that wanted to be a decent human being, sputtered a weak protest. She's a coworker. You should ask if she's okay. But the feeling, that cold, creeping dread, was stronger. I pushed the cash drawer closed, finished the count, and handed Una the keys. "Have a good one," I said, the words feeling flat and hollow. The departure phrase. That's what I had to say. No more, no less. Una didn't meet my eyes. She just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, and turned to leave. The bell chimed again as she pushed the door open, letting in a sliver of pre-dawn gray. She hurried out, almost running, and disappeared into the parking lot. I stood there for a moment, watching the empty doorway. The metallic smell lingered in the air, though it was fading now. I looked down at the sugar caddies. 19. Still an odd number. I noticed a small pile of napkins under the counter, covered in my lopsided cartoon trucks. I hadn't even realized I was still drawing. I picked up the logbook. I hadn't touched it since checking for Sergio Vargas's badge. I flipped through the pages, stopping at the last entry. Una's signature. Below it, a small, barely noticeable smudge of red lipstick. It looked like a tear. I closed the logbook, a new unsettling thought forming in my mind. I needed to check the security footage. I needed to see if Una had signed in with anyone else. And I needed to make sure the visitor count was still right. Because if it wasn't, I didn't want to think about what that would mean. I was wiping down the Formica, section by section, starting at the furthest booth and moving my way towards the door. It was a slow night, thankfully. Just a handful of truckers scattered around, mostly nursing lukewarm coffee and staring at the Weather Channel. 7:30, almost 8. It felt like the shift was running backwards, not forwards. Usually by this time, the real rush of early morning drivers would be starting. I used the lemon-scented cleaner, the cheap stuff that didn't really cut through the grease but made the diner smell less like a diner. I liked that smell. Actually better than the coffee, better than the stale cigarette smoke that clung to everything, even after the health inspector's visits. The rhythm of the wiping was almost meditative. Back and forth, circle, back and forth. It gave me something to focus on, something to keep my brain from wandering back to the foreclosure notice on the kitchen counter. I'd gone through all the booths, started on the counter, carefully avoiding stacking too many sugar caddies, 21 so far. Still good, still obeying. I caught myself doodling on a napkin again. Not trucks this time, just a series of interlocking squares, pointless, frustrating, like the whole situation. That's when I heard it, the elevator, which was weird. It wasn't scheduled for runs until the stock boy, Edison, came in at 9 to bring up the fresh produce. The diner didn't have much call for the elevator otherwise, just me going up to the office to change the register tape every few hours, and even then I usually took the stairs. The doors opened with that low, groaning sound they always made. It wasn't a mechanical failure, exactly. Just old and tired, like me. But the doors opened, and it wasn't on the ground floor. It was on the second floor, halfway between the kitchen and the office. No one was up there. No reason for the elevator to be up there. I paused, my hand hovering over the counter. Edison always left the elevator on the ground floor. Always. It was just one of the things he did, part of his routine. And my mind, driven half mad by weeks of oddness, immediately went to the missing visitor badge. Maybe someone else was up there, someone who shouldn't be, someone who used the elevator, and I trailed off. It was probably nothing, just a glitch, a faulty sensor. The building was ancient after all. Things went wrong with the machinery all the time. Old wiring, loose connections. I'd probably just jumped to conclusions, let my nerves get the better of me. I tried to convince myself it was a mechanical issue, a harmless quirk. There was no reason to panic, no reason to investigate. Then, the doors started to close, and I remembered. An impression, a fragment of something I'd read in that document, the one I'd found in the storage room, the one I tried not to think about. Something about the elevator. After 8, face away. It hadn't made any sense then, just another strange instruction in a sea of them, like collecting spoons or arranging the napkin dispensers. Now, with the doors sliding shut, the memory felt urgent. A warning, a reflex. Without thinking, I turned around, away from the closing doors, towards the wall behind me. I braced myself, expecting I don't know what. A jolt, a sound, a feeling of being watched, but there was nothing. just the chipped formica and the faded wallpaper patterned with sunflowers. The elevator completed its cycle, descended silently, and stopped on the ground floor. I didn't turn back. I couldn't. My hands were slick, but it wasn't sweat. It felt colder, like when you touch something that's been in the freezer too long, like my skin had lost all its warmth. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The doors opened again, and the normal, unremarkable hallway of the diner stretched out before me. Empty, untouched. I finally risked a glance. No one. Nothing. Just the sterile fluorescent lights and the lingering smell of lemon cleaner. I didn't go up to the office. I didn't change the register tape. The thought of taking the elevator, even facing the wall, filled me with a cold, creeping dread. Not fear exactly, more like aversion, like something profoundly wrong had almost happened, and I'd narrowly avoided seeing it. Something that once seen could never be unseen. I finished wiping the counter, rearranging the sugar caddies several times just to be safe. 33, 35, 41. Just to be sure, I glanced at the clock. 8:30. Edison would be here soon. I suddenly felt a desperate need to know if he'd noticed anything unusual about the elevator, but I knew instinctively that I wouldn't ask. Asking would be wrong. The thought settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I picked up the logbook and stared at Una's signature. I didn't open it. Instead, I started a new doodle on a napkin, a closed door. I was refilling the napkin dispensers. It was a mindless task, but it gave me something to focus on. The diner was quiet, thankfully, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional rumble of a truck passing on the highway. It was close to 11, the lull between the late-night truckers and the early birds. I liked this time. It felt normal. As normal as things got here anyway. Each dispenser got a fresh stack of the thin, beige napkins. Folded neatly, of course. Gwen always got on me about the presentation. "It's the little things, Kendrick," she'd say, adjusting a salt shaker by a millimeter. "Makes a difference." It probably didn't, but it was easier to keep her happy than argue. I stacked them 23 high. That felt right. An odd number. I'd caught myself arranging the sugar packets in even rows earlier, and the little jolt of anxiety that followed had been enough to cure me of any symmetry for the night. I was working my way down the counter past the booths when Jen approached. She was the manager. Usually she just stuck to the office, paperwork and inventory. Seeing her out front meant something was up. She had that pinched look around her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. "Kendrick," she said, her voice low. "Listen, about the cleaning schedule. Forget what's written on it for tonight. Just skip the floor scrubbing. It's all right. I'll handle it tomorrow." I blinked. The cleaning schedule was rigid. Every surface, every hour. It was obsessive, even for Gwen. And the floor scrubbing was specifically assigned to me. I glanced at the schedule taped to the wall behind the counter. There it was, in black marker. 11 p.m., 12 a.m., Kendrick floor scrub. "But the schedule?" I asked, dumbly. She waved her hand dismissively. "It's fine. Honestly, I need you to focus on keeping the coffee going. We're expecting a run of deliveries in the next hour, and I want to make sure we're ready. Forget the floor, okay?" It was strange. Jen was usually so meticulous. The schedule was her Bible. And the floor scrubbing was the worst part of the job. It was backbreaking work, and the diner's linoleum was ancient, stained, and smelled faintly of something I couldn't quite place. A reprieve from that seemed good, a simple kindness. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she'd realized how much work she'd been piling on me. I started to relax. It wasn't a big deal. She was the manager. She could change the schedule. But then, a flicker of something else. The document, the one in the storage room. I hadn't thought about it in hours, hadn't allowed myself to, but the memory surfaced, unbidden. Something about following the written rules, something about verbal instructions being unreliable. A fragment. If your supervisor gives you a verbal instruction that contradicts the written guidelines, I couldn't recall the exact wording. It had been a blur of bizarre instructions and arbitrary demands, but the gist was there. The impression lingered. I looked back at Jen. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. It wasn't a request. It was an order masked as flexibility, and it contradicted the schedule, the written schedule. My mouth felt dry. I forced myself to swallow. It was probably nothing. Jen was just being a manager, making adjustments on the fly. It didn't mean anything. But the document, the strange rules, the footprints, the security footage, it all felt connected, somehow like a web tightening around me. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'll stick to the coffee." Jen nodded, a tight, relieved smile on her face. "Good. Thanks, Kendrick." She turned and walked back towards the office, disappearing behind the beaded curtain. I didn't start refilling the coffee pot. Instead, I walked to the supply closet and got the floor scrubbing machine. It was heavy, awkward, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. I wrestled it into position near the entrance, plugged it in, and switched it on. The motor whined to life, a high-pitched, insistent sound that filled the otherwise quiet diner. I started scrubbing, methodically, carefully, following the pattern outlined in the schedule. Back and forth, row by row. The machine left a clean, wet stripe on the linoleum, slowly erasing the grime and the stains. I focused on the task, trying to block out the nagging feeling that I'd just done something wrong. As I worked, I noticed Edison arrive. He clocked in at the register, glancing at me with a curious expression. He didn't say anything, just nodded and started stocking the pastry case. I avoided his gaze. I didn't want to explain. I couldn't explain. The scrubbing machine sputtered and died. I glanced down. The water tank was empty. I switched it off and began the tedious process of refilling it. As I did, I noticed something on the floor, near one of the booths. A small rectangular piece of plastic, a visitor badge. I picked it up. It was blank. No name, no company logo, no identifying information, just a plain, white rectangle with a plastic clip. I remembered counting 17 returned badges after 18 sign-ins, one missing. I stared at the badge, my fingers tightening around it. I didn't understand, but a new kind of dread settled over me. A cold, heavy weight in my chest, the kind that told me things were about to get a lot worse. I looked up and saw Jen standing in the doorway to the office, watching me. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, her face unreadable, and for the first time tonight, I felt truly, utterly alone. I tucked the badge into my pocket. A new oddity to carry. I finished filling the water tank and started scrubbing again. The smell of disinfectant felt thin, insufficient. The fluorescent lights of the diner flickered as I clocked out. 7 a.m. The sun was already high enough to cast a dull glare on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I hadn't seen Jen since she stood in the doorway watching me scrub. She hadn't said good morning. She hadn't said goodbye. She just watched. I walked to my car, a beat-up Ford Taurus that smelled permanently of stale French fries and desperation. The engine turned over slowly, protesting the cold. I glanced back at the diner. It looked normal, exactly as it always did. I almost convinced myself the whole night had been a particularly vivid stress-induced hallucination. The missing badge was just misplaced. The footprints were from someone before my shift. The security footage was glitching. The rules were just me being tired and paranoid. I was letting the weight of everything, the bills, my wife's recovery, the constant fear of losing the house, get to me. It was an easy thought to entertain, a comfortable one, but I didn't quite believe it. I drove straight home, bypassing the usual gas station where I'd buy coffee and a newspaper. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to be anywhere but inside with my kids. My wife, Sarah, was already up making breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen. It was a good smell, a normal smell. I hugged her, tighter than usual. She smelled like soap and sleep. "Rough night?" she asked, leaning into the embrace. "It was a night," I said, carefully avoiding specifics. I couldn't explain it, even to her. I couldn't explain the feeling of being watched, the creeping sense that everything was slightly off-kilter. I couldn't explain the quiet compulsion to count things. Breakfast was quiet. I found myself stacking the pancakes into odd numbers on my plate. 3, then 5, then 7. It wasn't a conscious decision. My hand just did it. Sarah didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't say anything. I dropped the kids off at school, then went to the bank. The foreclosure paperwork was still there, looming over me like a storm cloud. The loan officer, a man named Hal, gave me a sympathetic look. "Anything new, Kendrick?" "Just working," I said, "trying to catch up." He shook his head. "I wish there was more I could do." I walked out of the bank feeling defeated. Back in the car, I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool plastic of the visitor badge. I pulled it out, stared at it, still blank, still utterly inexplicable. I put it back in my pocket. I've been back at the diner for 3 weeks now. I still take the overnight shift. It pays the bills, at least for a little while. I still scrub the floors, meticulously following the schedule. I still find myself counting things: sugar packets, coffee cups, the number of cars in the parking lot. Always making sure it's an odd number. It's automatic now. I don't even think about it. I avoid eye contact with new faces. I don't ask questions. I don't volunteer information. I just do my job and try to disappear into the background. Yesterday, I saw a new posting on the diner's bulletin board. A handwritten note taped next to the employee schedule. "Help wanted, overnight waitress. Apply within." The handwriting wasn't Jen's. It was someone else's. A different, looping script. I didn't read the whole thing. I didn't need to. I just kept walking. As I passed the office window, I noticed a new, unused visitor badge clipped to the sign-in sheet. It was white, rectangular, and completely blank, and beside it, a pen resting perfectly centered on the form.